Good morning and welcome to Member Focus Monday. I'm Christina Schaefer, Director of Social Media for HAR, and I am joined this morning by Paula Cleveland. She is with the National Association of Residential Property Managers, and she is a part of the Houston board right here in Houston. Welcome to the program, Paula.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate that.
Thank you so much for joining us. This was a highly requested topic, actually, from our members specifically. So we're really excited that you could take some time and talk to us about concerns, rules, regulations, challenges for both landlords and tenants. Obviously, this session is geared towards agents and brokers, but it's important for us to understand those challenges and concerns and all of the rules and regulations that could be tripping up the landlords and tenants that our members work with. For those that are tuning in this morning, we will be taking a lot of questions today, so type in your questions for Paula as they come to you. But also, Paula issued a challenge right before we went live, and she said, I would love to hear what our members want to learn more about. And you'll hear why, because Paula is an educator as well. You'll hear why in just a moment. But Paula, before we get into all of the questions I have for you, and I'm sure the questions our members are going to have, let's hear a little bit more about you, who you are and what you do.
Thank you so much. Well, I'm the broker owner of Keystone Signature Properties. And so we have two sides of the house. We do residential buy, sell, and lease, as well as like farm and ranch and raw land. And we also do a whole side of the house does nothing but property management. So those are what we do as a brokerage. And then just how I serve our members at HAR, I sit on the Management Central and also the Risk Management committees. And I love the opportunity to learn more, because I think every time you serve, you learn way more than you actually give. And I also do that at the state level, subcommittee of property management and professional standards.
Very good. Thank you so much. And as we mentioned, you're also a part of NARPM. Can you tell us a little bit about NARPM?
Yes, love to. National Association of Residential Property Managers, the Houston chapter. And so I've been on the board for several years, and as well as a TRLP. I can't not talk about TRLP because it's a graduate through HAR. It just takes you to greater levels of being able to communicate and have relationships with other leaders at the local level, at the state level. And definitely NARPM is huge on helping property managers, landlords, tenants, agents, brokers, all be better educated and more well-rounded as far as like what the responsibilities and what the law says.
Okay, very good. Thank you so much for that, Paula. And thank you, of course, for your leadership here locally and at TR as well. As I mentioned, you're also an educator. And you are teaching our members very frequently. So we'll talk a little bit about some educational opportunities at the end. I wanted to just briefly, if you could, tell us a little bit about the status of the rental market. What are you seeing? Are rents going up or down? Are days on market higher or lower? What is the current status of the rental market?
So really good question. As we all know, anytime we have these huge changes in our market over the last few years, you can count pandemic, you can count interest rates, you can count low inventory, and all of those things affect rentals as well. Landlords will have to decide if they're going to keep their inventory or sell at a high point. Also, investors who see that the market is a great place to invest in real estate, they will also purchase and add inventory. So we've had a stabilization kind of change, which is really good. The pricing is going to slow down a little bit. There'll be continued growth in pricing over the years because there's just appreciation or there's just inflation as it continues. But the double digits and the crazy that we've seen over the last few years has really calmed down. So we've seen the days on market increase. We've also seen the inventory increase a little bit, but prices are starting to stabilize.
Okay, that's good. So based on that, if you were speaking to maybe a landlord client, or maybe even a renter, what suggestions might you offer or advice might you give them?
For getting into the rental market for a tenant, wait, did you ask me tenant or landlord?
Both.
Good, good. So on the landlord side, it's really good to set expectations and the tenants as well. So sometimes landlords feel like the market has been climbing, and a lot of times as agents, we get to see that change before the public sees that change. And so we really have a great opportunity to kind of give them good data. HAR offers through our MLS, of course, the ability to see those changes. And I think you actually offer some really good data on a regular basis, which I hope you'll be able to share with them. But also, that will help you use data always to help guide your landlords into what the market is really doing. And it's going to be a subset, right? We can't talk about what's going on nationally. We can't talk about what's going on in HAR. You have to talk about what's going on close to that property, of course. And on a tenant perspective, their view is hard hit. So tenants don't like that everything has gone up, and that definitely includes rent.
That makes sense. And we did share the link to the most current rental report. We release these every third Wednesday. So we release the sales on the second Wednesday and rental on the third Wednesday. So we shared a direct link to that in the comments for anybody who wants to see the most current numbers. So again, today we're discussing landlords and tenants, rules, restrictions, resources, and challenges for landlords and tenants. So from your experience and what you see in the market, what rules and restrictions do you find are confusing both landlords and tenants at the moment?
Love that question because what guides that relationship between a landlord and a tenant is the lease agreement as well as the Texas Property Code. Texas Property Code is very dynamic. It measures out what we're supposed to be, not agents, but what the landlord is required to do and what the tenant is required to do. But just behind that, what guides their relationship as far as that property and that owner, that landlord relationship with that tenant is the lease agreement. And so I think a lot of times there's expectations are these are the standards, these are the things that you have to follow, but a landlord also has a mindset about that property, and there's no way you're going to get that information if if the landlord doesn't present it other than I'm going to screen and I'm going to write a contract or a lease agreement, and the tenant must perform under that lease agreement. So the landlord has an expectation, but the tenant maybe doesn't understand the landlord's whole view because every landlord is a little different. Every property is a little different. I think that's some of the big challenges that we face.
Yeah, those are great. Thank you for pointing those out to us. So as far as challenges, again, we have a lot of challenges, I'm sure, but some specific challenges we wanted to ask you about when it comes to the value and price. You've already mentioned a little bit about the tenant and the price concern. So what are some of the challenges you're seeing for value and price, both from the landlord perspective and the tenant perspective?
So I'm going to start with the landlord. The landlord has as many challenges as the tenant does. The rents, I'm sorry, not rents, taxes have gone up, insurance has gone up, supply costs have gone up, maintenance has gone up. And I would love to point out that from a landlord's perspective, and then we'll look at the tenant, but on the landlord side, if they have a house that's been functioning that has a tenant in there and the rents have gone up because of the cost of living, even for the landlord's expenses have gone up, it frustrates a tenant. They're not getting anything new. They're still living in the same house. And they see that the price has gone up, 10%, and then it goes up another 10%, and then it goes up another 5%. And they're like, what am I getting for that? Well, the truth is there's not been a change in lifestyle. It's just been a cost effective, just like everything else they're seeing, food going up, gas going up, their income maybe not going up. So it's very frustrating, but the landlord also has that same behavior. On the tenant side, they're feeling the heat of, I'm not getting anything new. I didn't get a new appliance. I mean, nothing's any cleaner. Nothing really has changed here. So there's sort of a little, there's a head game going on. There are some ways for landlords and tenants to kind of come to a happy medium, and I hope we get a chance to talk about that a little bit. You can let me know if we have a few minutes, but I would love to explain that some of the great things that would really help is that a landlord really goes and checks out their property and sees what they can do that really doesn't cost them anything except bridges a gap, develops a better relationship with that tenant. Because long-term tenants are very, very valuable. I mean, that's the whole point here, is to keep your property asset in good condition and keep the tenants comfortable and happy and doing the right things and making sure that house is healthy and safe.
That makes sense, and I'm sure there are things that can be done that are low cost that would, make the tenant happier about living in that environment. So, when you work with landlords, what are some low cost things that you maybe recommend?
Oh, I love that question. We like to talk to our landlords about what is it that you feel like. It's always a great thing just for them to acknowledge what's going on at the property. When's the last time the house was pressure washed? When's the last time you cut back the big growth off the big canopy of the trees? When's the last time you cleaned out the gutters? There is a lot of stuff that happens at a property, and we all know this. If you're a homeowner yourself, you know this. You're not abusing your house, you're just living there, but things have to be maintained. If there's a small leak, if there's a broken faucet, I mean, nothing happened. It just needs to be changed out, or it needs to be, just the water corrosion that we have will build up and just stop working. Or there's a clog or whatever. Now, sometimes a tenant causes a clog, and that falls under their responsibility, of course. But the truth is, things happen. So as a landlord, walking their property is very, very valuable. Listening to what the tenant has a concern about or worries about or asks. Gosh, if I've had a tenant, or a landlord has had a tenant for a couple of years, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7 years, wow, well, how impressive would it be if a landlord walked the property with the tenant and said, how's it going? What's going on? Have you seen any of this or that? And then make note of those things. And hey, you've been here 5 years. What can I do? Actually, if all you're doing is maintaining your property, I think they're going to feel really good about that. If you're cleaning out the gutter, if you're pressure washing the outside, if you're brightening up the front door, all you did was raise the asset value and not have to lose a tenant over it. I mean, it really does make a big difference. Small things count.
Yeah, those are great suggestions. Thank you for that. So let's talk about expectations. What challenges are you seeing when it comes to landlord and tenant expectations?
I think there's a fear on both sides of the fence. There's a fear that if a tenant turns in a request for a service ticket, that somebody's going to be in their business for like 3 to 5 days, or they're going to warrant somebody coming in and bustling through their stuff and looking at stuff. And am I prepped up for the landlord or a property management company to come through? The answer is probably not. You don't live like you show. We know this as agents, right? But the fear of having, to turn something in, or maybe even feeling like they're going to be called or held responsible for that cost, when the truth is maybe they're not. I mean, if it's maintenance related to normal wear and tear, or things property related, an owner really does want to know that. And on the landlord side, I think there's a little bit of a fear that, oh my gosh, the tenant's called 3 times. What do they really want from me? The answer isn't so much that they want to take you, to the cleaners. They want to live there. They just want to live in a healthy environment. So the closer you get to better communication with each other as a landlord and a tenant, the better things are going to be overall. The truth is, personality does play a big role. And expectations are huge. And so if the landlord doesn't really know the tenant's expectations, and the tenant doesn't really know the landlord's expectations, even though you have a document, that's just part of it, right? So I think that's a big part of it, fear on both sides.
So you mentioned even though you have a document, so really that, that contract they're signing, that's where you set the expectations, right? And that's where agents, brokers, that's where you jump in and can help. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, absolutely. So I love this question, because when we talk about landlords and we talk about tenants, as an agent, whether you represent a landlord or a tenant, you're wearing different hats. And the representation from an agency perspective is not property management. It is the opportunity to list a property for lease and to get it marketed appropriately, to put the correct criteria based on what the landlord's criteria is out there for screening, and then provide a service that's out there for screening. As an agent, we don't do screening. We don't choose applicants. That's a landlord responsibility. And so, but if you don't know what Texas Property Code says, and you don't know how to help a landlord to understand what their responsibilities are, landlords can get a little bit out there in right or left field. They could have taken an old Texas realtor lease agreement and revamped it to make it their own, and the Texas Realtor lease agreement has changed dramatically. By the time you add that 17, 18 page document, plus the addenda that really should be going with it, as well as landlord rules and regulations or any other disclosure, like the flood is now required, animal assisted animal information to the landlord, all those things help your landlord understand their role better. But you as an agent should know what the boundary is of helping your landlord and helping them understand why the Texas real estate lease agreement that's constantly being reviewed by the legal team, that's constantly being updated, is really going to make a better platform for them and be more respectful and responsible across the board to landlords and tenants. So that's really big, is helping your landlord understand what their responsibility is. And if you don't know that, education is the key. Representation is what we're saying we're doing. And I think if we don't know that as agents, are we really following our guidelines, and are we following the fact that we're outside of our expertise?
Excellent. Great points. Thank you so much. You mentioned pets, and I wanted to stop for a second because I did see a question come in about not necessarily pets, but service animals. And I don't see it now. Oh, I thought I saw, I'm so sorry. I thought I saw a question about service animals come in, and now I cannot find it. If you had a question about service animals, if you will. Oh, I found it. Here we go. Landlords are required by fair housing law to provide reasonable accommodations for a person with a service animal. The challenge is that now it seems that all animals are being deemed service animals. Do you want to speak to that at all, Paula?
Yes, that'd be great. That tends to be a big challenge that never goes away. That service is constantly in our communication of landlords and tenants, and it constantly rises to the top in educational changes. First of all, there's a national call out for what is a service animal. The documentation that we have here in Texas, and I'm very thankful that we have great documentation because other states don't even have it. Can you just imagine? But on the assistant animals, there's a couple things that will help us all as agents. First of all, when you have someone who claims they have an assistant animal, which is the new title, they've gone away from using the word pets. I mean, yes, everybody has pets. That's not what I mean. But service animals versus emotional support animals. Those all under the heading of assistant animals, and they're broken up into subcategories. What we try to say is, if you really don't understand that, you can't give guidance on that. You can't give advice. What you can do is tell your landlord, if you're representing a landlord, make sure that they're screening through petscreening.com. We tend to push that particular vendor or that property service because that was developed by a property management company, and it's national, and they actually do all the work. So the person who's being screened, the applicant would send their documentation over, and about 50% is, I think, the number that they're giving us, 50 to 55% of those animals being screened that are claiming to be assistant animals aren't. So then those people have a choice. They either upload the appropriate documentation, go get it fixed, or they come back where it comes to the landlord, and the landlord says, well, then, you've not met the criteria for an assistant animal. So they're not held under that behavior of I'm having to choose by myself without support, really good support. And so when they get to that point, they can make a decision. Well, if you want that animal, then it's not following the guidelines for an assistant animal. So you're going to need to pay your pet agreement responsibilities, whether that's deposit, more rent, or both, or fees, whatever that landlord has down as their criteria for pets.
Okay. Demetria had a related question, which I think we partially answered at least. Her initial question was, and this was before you started answering the other one. So she said, what is the landlord's recourse if a current tenant notifies them they now have a service animal? Does the landlord have the right to terminate the lease based on the change?
I would go back to that thing that I just said, which is okay, because that is a different question. I, as the landlord, the landlord should make the call to say, no, you can't just add an assistant animal because you've now added an animal to the property. What I also love about our changes to our documentation in Texas is it's not a pet agreement. It's not a third party pet agreement as part of the lease or addendum. It is the animal agreement. So it allows for that agreement to be added as an addendum, that animal to be marked as assistant animal, and you can send them off for screening. And if they don't meet the criteria, then that now the landlord says, okay, you didn't meet the criteria, so they can terminate the lease. But you need to know, not you, not the agent, don't try to make these decisions for your landlord. The landlord needs to understand what their responsibilities are under the paragraph in the lease agreement. And hopefully they're using the Texas realtor lease agreement. If not, then they're going to be held to the standard for which the lease is written and Texas property code. The lease is going to guide. Texas property code is really, again, the framework, and the lease agreement adds on top of that. And then, of course, there's additional things that add on that: landlord rules and regulations, HOA responsibilities. Those kinds of things then play out on top in layers of what the responsibilities are. So specific to that, a landlord should have the animal gone through the process, and then make a decision. If it truly comes back as an assistant animal, then add the addendum, do an amendment to the lease, add it that way.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much, Paula. And I do see other questions coming in. If you have questions for Paula, please type those in. We'll get to as many as we can. So getting back to some of the challenges, Paula, we've talked about the challenge with the value and price of rentals. We've talked about expectations. You've mentioned responsibilities a little bit. Let's talk about that. What challenges are you seeing as far as landlord and tenant responsibilities?
Okay, so what happens a lot when an agreement is signed, and I'm talking a lot to the Texas Realtor form for the lease agreement. I'm doing that because that's what we use under the property management side. We don't use somebody's other contract because I wouldn't have a clue what it would say. So in that document, it spells out who's responsible for what under maintenance agreements. And so there's a lot of things that tenants don't really realize. I'm pretty sure, I can't say that nobody reads. I'm not going to try to say that, but I am going to say that once you read something, if y'all are like me, I mean, I retained a portion of it, not all of it. I have to go back and reread. Well, once something is signed, a landlord and a tenant most likely will put them away. A landlord who has multiple properties will know what's in his lease because he's a lot more involved. A landlord that has one or two may not even know what's going on a lot. A tenant, per that lease agreement, is responsible for pest, as an example, for pest extermination, for maintenance, all that kind of stuff. Well, what does that mean? That means if there's a rodent or if there's a roach problem or there's a challenge at the property, should they let the owner know? I think it's a great idea. There's that communication again that keeps everything open and more clear. An owner might be willing to step in, or a landlord might be willing to step in and say, hey, that's been a problem. I'm gonna do a big sweep. I'm gonna do the termite. I'm gonna do all this other stuff. But you guys probably brought your own roaches in. You need to do that. So depending on that relationship, that could play a couple different ways. But a tenant, per that lease agreement, is responsible for pest. Another one that's huge is a lot of things fall under the maintenance. The yard. There's a definition inside the lease agreement that says what the yard is. A lot of people think if they've mowed the grass, then they took care of the yard. The truth is, it's flower beds, it's trees, it's bushes, it's maintaining the water levels. And then that's part of what's written in there. How often are they supposed to water? There's a lot of things that tenants are responsible for under maintenance that they thought, well, I leased a house, and so that's not my house. I don't have to do that. They're also supposed to, as an example, know where the water shutoff is. How many tenants know where the water shutoff is? It's a big deal. If something breaks, they're also responsible, by the way, for winterization of the water pipes. Look how many challenges we've had with that. Well, who then? So responsibilities. It's not just expectations. It's what's in the lease. So I think that tends to be one of the main key issues is maintenance, tenants feeling like that's not their responsibility, or landlords knowing what the lease agreement says and says that's not my responsibility. I love the fact that we're talking about not just documentation, but relationship, because that agreement is a relationship as well as it is a living document. It is not changing so much as it is, it's everybody has a perception of how that plays out. So it's really important that both parties communicate.
Yes. So, and I'm so glad you just said the word communicate, because it sounds like a lot of the challenges that you've mentioned could be solved with some communication. So, how could communication be improved between tenants and landlords?
Well, that's the never-ending story right there of communicating. Better communication is just part of everybody's relationship. But when it comes to tenant and landlords, one of the things I love landlords to do who are really maintaining properties, it takes time. Everything that's has value really takes time, right? You have to slow down. You have to care about other people. You have to be respectful, respecting yourself and your property as part of a landlord responsibility. Really communicates something, right? Even non-verbally, if I, as a landlord, which I'm not, put a house on the market and it's okay clean, it's got some scuffs and some muffs, and it's and my mindset is it's a rental, and I'm going to rent it out at this price, and whatever tenancy gets it, that it needs to come back at that level. Then that sets a tone. That sets a tone of what the expectation is. But when I have a landlord who says, I'm going to meet my tenant at the house, I'm going to show them around, I'm going to tell them how to change out the air filters, I'm going to, leave one in there that's brand new and clean. The house has been, completely cleaned, the carpet's been cleaned, and the expectation level rises greatly. That person cared enough about not just me, but this property, that if I feel like there's a real concern, I can contact that landlord and they're going to be respectful and responsible. Also, giving that information, landlords are required by Texas Property Code to have that the tenant's able to contact them 24/7. Yeah. So a lot of landlords don't understand that. They're like, well, it's, they'll send me an email, send me a text, and I'll take care of it. Or maybe I will, maybe I won't. But there's a lot more to landlording than just, I collect rent. Just a lot more to it.
Collecting a check, right. Okay, very good. We had some questions come in that I want to touch on here. Brenda said, what can a tenant do when a landlord does not respond when they finally do, days or weeks later? They say they will take care of an issue and never do. In this case, she's saying an owner lives out of state and works evenings.
So good question. If you represented the landlord, I'm not sure which party you represented as the agent during the transaction of getting the property leased, and the tenant's now calling you, and that's how you know they're not being reached. A great recommendation, you can't help that tenant. That's property management. That puts your brokerage at risk, so be very careful about that. That's just advice to you as an agent. But for your landlord, recommending real property management would be wise. That they really don't probably understand that in Texas, tenants have lots of rights, in every state, I'm sure, but Texas for sure, tenants have rights. And some of the big changes that has happened through the pandemic is tenant rights are being very well represented, and there are attorneys that sit inside of courtrooms or just in the hall looking for tenant relation issues, and they'll take those cases on, and there's plenty of government money that's funding that. So tenants have rights, and they're kind of tired of being taken advantage of. Also, it puts a very, very bad light on if 50 to 54% of the activity in our market is rental, and it's getting up there, somewhere between 40 and 54% is rental. That's a lot of rental. Landlords need to take what they do very seriously. And we find that there's everything under the sun. A landlord who is an accidental landlord is a good way to say it. They don't want to sell their house, they're coming back or whatever, and they just put it up for lease. So they're thinking, these are my expenses, I'll make at least that much in rent. So within, a few dollars, I'm fine. Well, I don't want to hire property management. There's really nothing to do. Oh my goodness. And so the answer to your question is that landlord is responsible, not you. You really can't fix that for a tenant. That is a landlord responsibility. And if the tenant has to move forward and take some legal action to get some help, they should. The lease agreement, if it's the Texas Realtor lease, there are remedies in there, and they always lead the tenants back to Texas Property Code. And so the advice would be for the tenant to follow the lease agreement, follow Texas Property Code, because there are remedies in there.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much. Going back to petscreening.com, we just had a quick question from Demetria. Is there a fee for petscreening.com?
Yes, there is, but it's tenant fee. So anytime a tenant is going to be screened, it's a fee per pet plus tax. I know that plus tax just got added this last year, and I'm not even sure what the fee is, and I don't know if there's a price break per pet, but it doesn't. It's not the landlord fee; it's the tenant fee.
Very good. Couple other questions that came in here. There is asking for a little bit of distinction here. Monique is saying, is there an advantage to using the TXR versus TAR lease application?
The TXR and the TAR are the same. TAR has changed their name just to the TXR. We used to call it TAR, and I think they got tired of hearing us say TAR. I don't know. I don't know why I don't know, but Texas Realtors changed their marketing is what happened. And so now it's TXR. Same form.
Yes, very good. Thank you for that clarification. All right. So, here was another question. I'm sorry, about pets or service animals. Sharon said, if a landlord has never allowed any pets on the property, does the landlord have to allow an assisted animal on their property?
Yes, they do. And so there's actually a Texas Texas Realtor form that breaks it down, explains it clearly so that you, the agent, can just pass that information along to the landlord. Anytime you take a listing for a landlord to market a property, just now talk to your broker. I'm not trying to do brokerage here for everybody, but I'm saying check with your broker before you do this. But there's a form that you can offer that up as part of your lease agreement so that you can mark off that you supplied that to the landlord. And it explains to them that they don't have a choice. But when they don't have a choice, there also needs to be a good process, a good system. And I've probably not talked near enough about processes and systems. But anytime you're going to do something more than one time, if you're going to continue to represent landlords or continue to help tenants, start building systems and processes into your program of how you take listings and how you close out a transaction. All those things will help you represent better and understand those roles better so that you aren't crossing the line. You're not doing property management, and yet you're not ignoring the fact that your landlord is probably not performing highly enough. Help educate them as you grow in your business. Help educate your client.
Excellent advice. Just wanted to throw this in here because you mentioned TAR. It's also not HAR, as you see HAR.com commented here. It's HAR. We always say it's not hardy har har. It's just HAR. So very good. Thank you for that. Couple other questions. We have actually a lot of questions, so I'm going to try and get to as many as we can here. And I still have a few other questions for you specific to resources. I saw a few people asking about resources, so we will definitely get to that. We had a question from CJ Johnson. She said, can you provide an overview of the new/improved voucher program, formerly Section 8, with the difference between the regular and VASH, along with the benefits for landlords and realtors?
Well, I love the question. The answer is that is a whole class. And I'm pretty sure being prepared to actually communicate that would take 10 to 15 minutes. I mean, it's probably not like a quick overview. But some of the biggest things that we're overlooking as agents and brokerages are trying to help landlords understand the process of voucher programs. There's more than just the two that are on this screen. There is also VA programs, which I don't know what VASH may be, the VA program, local Houston market. But there's also DebtCog, Deep East Texas, but it bleeds into our market. So there's a couple of other things that are voucher programs. just a huge, as fast as I can, 30-second summary. I don't think I have that. I can't talk fast enough. Is you need to be educated about them. There are programs down in Houston that they will train you as agents to sit in a class. It's usually about 3 hours. Can't remember if you get CE credit for it or not, but the bottom line is you don't always need credit for something that's going to improve your value to your clients. You really need to understand if your landlord says, oh, don't take Section 8, don't want to. Well, okay, why? Try to understand why. You're not pushing the program nor leaving it out. But the point is, if there is a lack of education, then you can improve, you can raise that bar, you can do that. And also, that's one of the things that we talked about earlier. I think that would be a great, another opportunity to talk about that program or those programs, kind of where they far outreach, in what areas they all perform in, and also what the benefits are to both tenants and landlords. And those are things that we can put together programs for to teach agents, as well as maybe you can develop a piece to give to landlords, just so that they can educate themselves higher. I love that question. Thank you for asking it.
Very good. And that kind of ties into also what Jantavia was asking. She said, how do we bridge the gap between tenants with a housing choice voucher and the amount of landlords that refuse to accept it? So that ties in there. Are there any other suggestions about bridging that gap?
Education is number one. Number two, it would be great if we could come up with some pieces that all agents can get on HAR. But the truth is, there are reasons why there are either stigmas from past experiences, lack of understanding, just lots of reasons. And I think that could be the biggest gap changer we could do quickly as agents and brokers, is really offer up pieces that we could pass along to the landlords. It's not the people that have the vouchers that are trying so hard to get in. It's the landlords that are very skeptical on their use and their performance and what all they have to be responsible for. And we could be a gateway for that.
Very good. And I have to say, as we plan our programming for April for Member Focus Monday and the HAR on the Move podcast, April, as we know, is Fair Housing Month. So if more people want to hear about this might be a great topic for us to focus on for one of the weeks. So let me know in the comments if that's something that you would like to learn more about. Excellent. So again, we have a few other questions here that we want to try to address, again, as many as we can, but I know we have limited time. So Judy, quick question here. Is the bedbug addendum required to be a part of the lease agreement?
So the bedbug addendum is a very useful tool. Required, you need to ask your broker. If your broker says it's required for their package of paperwork, then the answer would be yes. Is it required from a state perspective or a disclosure perspective? I don't think there's a requirement at that level, but let me give you a couple of benefits on why it's useful for both landlord and tenant. If there's a bed bug outbreak and nobody knows when there will be one, it's kind of like one of those forms that protects everybody. If there is not basically the form breaks down and says, are you aware, Mr. Landlord, or actually it's the tenant, are you aware, tenant, that there's a possible, bed bug infestation? It's either a yes or a no. If it's a vacant house, could there be bed bugs? Because somebody could have just moved out and they're not eradicated yet. So just because you can't see them doesn't mean there isn't one. But it gives a tenant an opportunity to think about it before they sign it. Well, have I looked? Do I even understand bed bugs? Is that something I should be aware of? I mean, how does that affect me? Sometimes people aren't even thinking about those things unless we bring them up. So it's a good form for awareness. The second thing is it has some protection. If the tenant says, well, I don't know, I don't even know how to test for bed bugs. Well, that's an opportunity for them to say, I can't answer that question right now. And so if you're representing a tenant, you would love to see that form added because it's going to drive awareness and you can communicate that with the tenant. If it's a landlord, you would love to see that form used because it says, hey, I've done everything that I could to make sure that the house is in good condition. And at least the tenant is saying they have no whereabouts, or there's no evidence of bed bugs that they can see. So it's just a protective document. And so again, if your broker calls for it, or you think it's a good form that would support your representation for that client, please talk to your brokerage and see if it's something that you should add on a every time basis or just regular, use as you need it. I think it's a good form.
Okay, very good. Thank you so much, Judy, for that question, and Paul, of course, for answering that question for us. Richard Ortiz asked, what is the maximum amount of late fees a tenant can pay per month?
Really good question, Richard. There are maximum amounts, and it depends on the type of property. So today we're talking about single family residence, not apartments or complexes, not multifamily, single family. So the max is 12%. That is not written in the new lease agreement. It doesn't say, it says in bold that the landlord and the tenant need to go back to Texas Property Code and understand what that max is. And there was a reason probably why they didn't post it in there. But if it's unreasonable, if the initial late fee is unreasonable, then all this stuff has to be stair-stepped out of control, right, before someone's going to take action. But again, these are guidelines and rules and responsibilities that each party should be playing a part of. So if the landlord says to you, I want in my lease agreement that rents are due after day one and the initial late fee is $250. Is that reasonable? Well, first of all, there is a problem with that because Texas Property Code says you cannot be late until the third day, the second day after rent is due. So after 3 full days. If rent's due on the 5th, that's not the 5th, that's like after day 8. But if it's due on the 1st, that's the first initial late fee can be posted on day 4. Then if your initial late fee if your daily rate after that is some crazy number like $50 or $75 a day, well, you're going to bust it in a couple of days. And so is that going to be considered reasonable? It's going to end up before, a court before you have to know those things. The point is, thank you, Richard, is a really good question. Helping your landlord understand the rules of Texas Property Code are going to help them build a better lease and be more respectful. Another word, the same word we've used before, respectful, reasonable, fair. All those things are going to count in a relationship.
Okay, very good. Thank you for that. Elias had asked, I have an investor that is a new landlord. Do you have sources and guides that I could share with them?
Investor has a new landlord. Well, we do property management, and so I would tell you that Realtors. No, just kidding. I'm going crazy. NARPM, National Association of Residential Property Management, is at the local level in Houston chapter. Landlords, tenants, agents. Although it is a property management association, we welcome people to come to our monthly meetings. And the reason why that's a really good question is because new landlords, again, my suggestion is if they're going to use you for leasing out their properties, get them familiar with the lease documentation. Make sure they get a copy of it. Make sure they read it all. Make sure they understand their responsibilities and roles under that lease. And then direct them towards Texas Property Code 92 and 97. It's big. They could get a binder printed out, start working through it, understand the rules and responsibilities that they're held under. But as they grow, if they continue to grow in the leasing sector of their portfolio in real estate, then make sure that somebody is being educated more and more and more. Getting your toe wet is like anything else. You know how to drive because you have a driver's license, but you're not going to go drive a semi. You're not going to go be driving a van of kids across to Florida, whatever. You got to know your limitations, and if they don't know, education is the key.
Okay, very good. Rosie just threw in, I send the Texas Property Code to all landlords along with the listing documents. So great there. So kind of this almost piggybacks into what Elias was asking about. Let's say you were sitting down and counseling a landlord, maybe it's a new landlord or just somebody that you're working with for the first time. What are some best practices that you would maybe recommend to that landlord?
So we just covered the top two big ones: is know the
Mm-hmm.
lease agreement that you're fixing to ask someone to sign yourself, and the second is for Texas Property Code. Third is know that property. If you know that property floods, you have, whether you know it floods or not, you owe a responsibility for disclosure on that, and your agent should be able to provide that documentation to that landlord to fill out at the beginning so that they have it ready to send over to an applicant that's approved. The next thing is know the property. I think I was talking about that. Does it have a history of a poor hot water heater? Is it 18 years old? If the landlord knows that, then they need to be aware that it could go out at any moment, and they should not be surprised when a tenant calls. Is it clean? Is it fresh? Is the caulking in good order? Or is there a drainage problem in the thing? Know the property. That's really important for best practices for a landlord. The next thing is be a good communicator, be respectful and responsible, not just to the property, but for your tenants. The greatest thing that landlords can do outside of understanding their responsibilities, the documentation, and keeping the property healthy and safe, know their requirements for locks, security locks, and for smoke detectors, and for windows locks, and for what a tenant can ask for at the landlord's expense. What can a tenant ask for, like assistant animal or ADA changes? Who pays for that? All that's covered, and there's just so much. So knowing upfront helps, but good communication, being respectful. One of the best things that you can do, you bought a property as a landlord they bought a property on purpose, right, to be an investor. So play the full role, not just owning the asset, but understanding their full role. And sometimes, actually a lot of times, landlords really don't want to do that. They want to be the silent partner, and they want to just take the funds. And there's a role for that too. And when a landlord just wants to play that part, I don't want to be part of the screening. I don't want to be up 24/7. I don't want to do documentation. I don't want to understand the laws. I don't want to. That is a great place to hire a property management company, 100%, because that's what they do.
Yeah, very good. Going back to the 12% that you mentioned earlier, Sharon said, is the 12% max per day or per month, and does that include the initial late fee?
The 12% is for single family residents is per month, and that includes the initial late fee. Yes, it does. All late fees once they hit a certain point. And by the way, 12% is the ceiling. So a good landlord probably won't want to get to the ceiling very often. They're going to set themselves up to, if a tenant is going to be habitually late and you got past 10, 12, 15 days, why are they not paying? I think that's another big thing. Landlords have to understand that they have a responsibility to themselves and to their expenses. That if they continue to allow tenants to not perform, they've not rewritten, but they've allowed it. And so to go before a judge 6 months from now and you've allowed a tenant to sit in there for 3 months and you've taken no action, I think a judge is going to say, well, they could say, I'm not have I not mentioned I'm not an attorney yet? Because I'm not an attorney.
You didn't, but we'll state it now.
But a judge could say, why did you not make them perform? I mean, why are you waiting so long to cause that out? So now, habitually late might be 18 days out. So that's an additional conversation above the max of what a landlord really should be paying attention to.
Excellent. Well, Paula, I'm sure if we kept going here, they would have more and more questions for you. We might have to have you back sometime soon to talk about even more. Go dive a little deeper here. Shiva's asked a question: how do I sign up for classes? So what resources or educational opportunities do you recommend?
Well, I know that I'm gonna teach the top three or preach the top three again. Texas Realtors at the state level has great classes. There's the TRLS, Texas Residential Leasing Specialist. It is a 2-day class. HAR will offer it. It's a Texas designation. But HAR will offer it. It's just rare. And so sign up if you have the opportunity, or look around to see if maybe you can take it as a webinar online. I don't know if they're doing that. There's another level above that if you're in property management. I think it's more like 3 days. The TRLS, though, you don't have to have property management experience. It just takes you into a really deep dive of contracts. The other thing that would be, and TXR also has a ton of really, really good ongoing things. So if you're working with leases, and it sounds like, that's what we're doing here, is they're constantly talking about security deposits, that kind of thing. And so when a landlord asks you a question about security deposit, hey, you know what? You have a resource. You can offer that resource out to them. How do they handle security deposits? What about trust accounts? Those kinds of things. So TXR, HAR for sure, constantly, and I so appreciate our local association constantly trying to raise the bar for us here in Houston. And they will offer many classes that relate to, we actually have a subcommittee under risk management. It's the number one risk through TREC that gets posted is lease issues. Under agents, under landlord tenant issues. It's just, it covers a bulk of what gets submitted. So HAR, TXR, and then NARPM for sure, National Association of Residential Property Management. I almost slurred that. The Houston chapter meets once a month down in Houston, and you can find it, narpmhouston.com.
Great. And we did share their website in the comments as well. So thank you for that. Paula, like I said, we've learned so much from you today. I'd like to get some closing thoughts from you, but I did want to share just some comments that we were receiving. Richard Ortiz said, great information, Paula. Excellent guidance from you as usual. HAR Executive Vice President Renee Galvan said, wow, Paula, what great information. Thank you for sharing. Hawalul Hussein said, thank you for informing us about this conversation. As a landlord, I really needed it. So we really appreciate your time today. Paula, is there anything else that you want to share with our members today?
I would say the only thing that came to mind was we have the opportunity to raise the bar. I'll say that a million times. But we also have the opportunity to calm the waters. So just being good communicators ourselves, being the example that we want others to be when we try to represent our clients, when they get excited or nervous or stressed, reach out to another resource. If you don't know it, sometimes we feel like we have to know everything, and there's just no way we can. Just things change so much. So just keep reaching out, just keep staying informed. And I would love to be a resource for you. So thanks for having me.
Well, thank you so much. Just one more comment that came in. Patricia Juarez said, thank you so much. It will help protect so many of our clients on both sides, including ourselves and our families. So thank you again, Paula, for your time today. And thank you all for tuning in. That is it for this week's Member Focus Monday. We will see you back next Monday at 9 a.m. Same place, same time. Have a great week, everyone. Bye-bye.